On our anniversary, she texted. Forgot. Busy with boss. I gave her gift to her stepsister instead. When a video hit 1 million views, her boss called me in a rage. 3 days later, he lost $6 million, and she lost everything she thought was safe. She never saw it coming. My name is Nolan Graves. I'm 44 years old. I've worked as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant outside Columbus, Ohio, for going on 19 years. I fix things for a living. Turbines, conveyor systems, hydraulic lines. I understand how machines work because I understand how pressure builds, where metal fatigues, and at what point a hairline fracture becomes a full break. Funny how that didn't translate to my own marriage. Camilla and I have been together for 17 years, married for 15 of them. She was a senior strategy manager at a regional manufacturing corporation, the kind of job that came with a corner office, quarterly travel, and a boss named Lester Crane, who seemed to believe that his position entitled him to more than his salary. I met Crane twice at company events. Twice was enough. The man had a handshake like a politician and eyes that never stopped calculating. For our 15th anniversary, I decided to do something I'd never done before. Not flowers from a gas station. Not dinner reservations I'd forgotten to confirm. Something real. I spent 2 weeks planning it. Ordered a rack of lamb from the butcher on 5th Street, the one Camilla always said we should try. Picked up a bottle of the Malbec she mentioned, once in passing, 8 months ago. Yeah, I wrote it down. Set the dining room table like I'd seen her do for guests we had over years ago, right down to the folded cloth napkins and the taper candles in the brass holders her mother left her. By 6:30, the food was ready and the candles were lit. By 7 o'clock, the food was getting cold. At 7:18, my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up expecting traffic, expecting some apology wrapped in excuses. What I got was 4 words in a period. Forgot. Busy with boss. No follow-up. No sorry. No ETA. Just that. Flat and final as a door slamming shut in an empty hallway. I stood there for a moment with the phone in my hand looking at the table. I'd set like I actually thought it would matter. The candles were still going. The lamb was still warm. And something inside me went very, very quiet. I didn't blow up, didn't throw anything, didn't call her back and say things I couldn't take back. I just set the phone down, walked to the counter, picked up the small wrapped box I'd spent a week tracking down. A vintage locket with a hand-engraved compass rose, the kind of thing she once said she'd always wanted. And I walked out of my truck. 20 minutes later, I was standing on Hazel Drummond's porch. Hazel was Camilla's stepsister, 39 years old, lived alone in a small craftsman house on the east side of town. She opened the door in paint-stained jeans and reading glasses, holding a mug like she'd just been interrupted mid-sentence. She blinked at me once, then again. Hola. Her voice carried the kind of concern that doesn't perform itself. Is everything okay? I held out the box. She's busy, I said. You're not. Hazel looked at the box, then at me. She didn't pry, didn't ask the dozen questions I could see behind her eyes. She just reached out slowly and took it, holding it with both hands like it was something fragile. You sure about this? She asked quietly. Gift doesn't mean anything sitting on a counter, I replied. She nodded once, and something in her expression shifted. Not pity, something older and steadier than that. Thank you, Nolan. I mean it. I turned to leave. She called after me from the doorway, voice low but clear. I hope she knows what she just walked away from. I didn't answer. I got in the truck and drove home to a table still set for 2. Candles burned halfway down, and a silence that had stopped feeling like absence and started feeling like an answer. She came home at 1:53 in the morning. I heard the door, her heels, the coat coming off. She didn't glance into the dining room, didn't say my name. just moved through the dark house like a woman who'd long since stopped wondering if anyone was waiting. I lay on my side of the bed and stared at the ceiling, and I started counting. Not the years, the patterns. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was crying into my pillow. I was past bat. I lay there with my eyes open, running numbers the way I run diagnostics on a failing machine. What broke when? Why didn't catch it sooner? Camilla left early the next morning, without a word about the dinner, without a glance at the dining room I still hadn't cleared. She poured her coffee, checked her phone twice, and walked out the door like the evening before had simply ceased to exist. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her go. Then I drove to work. Put in a full shift recalibrating a hydraulic press that had been throwing off tolerances for a week. Came home and called Boyd Tillman. Boyd was my oldest friend. 46, worked in industrial safety inspection, the kind of man who said exactly what he thought and never dressed it up to spare your feelings. We'd known each other since our 20s. He answered on the second ring. She didn't show. He asked before I'd finished the sentence. For words, I told him. Forgot. Busy with boss. A long pause. Then Boyd said, low and flat. No one. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. I didn't argue. I already knew he was right. What I didn't know yet was that Hazel had filmed herself opening the gift. She texted me the next morning. Just a heads up, nothing dramatic. Said she'd recorded a little clip for herself. Something personal. And had accidentally shared it to her public profile instead of a private story. She offered to take it down. I told her to leave it. At that point, it had maybe 200 views. I figured it would fizzle out by afternoon. It didn't fizzle. By noon, it had crossed 40,000. By the time I got home from work, my phone had a notification from Boyd. Brother, you need to look at this. I sat down at the kitchen table and watched the clip for the first time. Hazel was on her couch, in the same flannel she'd been wearing the night before, the wrapped box in her lap. Her voice was steady but soft, the way it gets when something genuinely catches her off guard. This was meant for my stepsister, she said, looking straight into the camera. It's her anniversary today. Her husband brought it to me instead. She opened the box slowly, and when she saw the locket, the compass rose, the engraving. She pressed her hand over her mouth and went quiet for a moment. Then she said my name. Just my name. Nothing else needed. The comments were already pouring in. She skipped her anniversary for work. And this man brought the gift to her sister. The quiet ones always see everything. Watch out for the quiet ones. This is what it looks like when a man runs out of patience. No drama, just redirection. One comment stopped me cold. Someone wrote, "This is what men do right before they leave. They don't yell, they reassign." I read that 3 times. By the following morning, the video had passed 1 million views. It got picked up by Men's Lifestyle podcast, stitched into reaction videos, quoted in Twitter threads about emotional neglect. A marriage counselor posted a response calling it the quietest confrontation I've ever seen. None of them knew my name. None of them needed to. Then my phone rang. Unlisted number. 8:14 in the morning. I was pouring coffee when I answered. You think this is funny? The voice was clipped, already running hot. Lester Crane. I recognized the cadence. The tone of a man who'd spent decades never being challenged. That video. Your little stunt with the stepsister. I set the mug down slowly. I don't know what you're referring to, I replied, keeping my voice level. Don't play games with me, he snapped. I know exactly what you're doing. You're trying to embarrass her. You're trying to embarrass me. Mr. Crane, I said, calm as a closing valve. I gave a gift to someone who was home when she was asked to be. If that embarrasses anyone, the math isn't hard. Silence. The kind that crackles with something a man can't quite swallow. "You have no idea what you started," he said finally. "Maybe not," I answered. "But I have a feeling you're about to show me." He hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a moment, processing what had just happened. He called me. Not to explain, not to apologize on Camilla's behalf, to warn me off. That told me everything I needed to know about what those late meetings actually were. That evening, I drove to Boyd's place, sat at his kitchen table with 2 beers and the hotel receipt I'd found in Camilla's jacket pocket 4 months earlier. A charge I hadn't confronted her about because I'd been trying to believe there was an innocent explanation. Boyd looked at it for a long time. "San Diego," he said. "March. She told you that was the regional vendor summit." "She did," I confirmed. He slid it back across the table. "And before Crane, was there anyone else you know of?" Anyone before him, I thought about it. About a name I'd seen flash across her phone screen 18 months ago. A number she'd saved under an initial. The trip to Portland she'd taken with a colleague from legal that her company had no record of when I checked the travel portal, too. Weeks later. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think Crane's not the first." Boyd leaned back and looked at me the way men look at each other when there's nothing left to soften. "Then we build a full picture," he said, "and we do it right." I nodded. The machine had been failing longer than I thought. Time to find every fracture point. There's a particular kind of loneliness in a house where 2 people are still going through the motions. You pass each other in the hallway. You share a bathroom. You sleep on opposite sides of a bed like 2 countries that stopped negotiating. And all the while, something is quietly dying in the space between you, and only one of you knows it. Camilla came home that Tuesday like nothing had shifted, asked if I picked up dry cleaning, mentioned she had an early call Wednesday, poured herself a glass of water, and went upstairs. I sat in the kitchen and thought about what Boyd had said. Build a full picture. Do it right. So I started doing exactly that. I've been a mechanical engineer long enough to know that a failing system always leaves evidence. Stress marks, wear patterns, residue. You just have to know where to look. I started in the obvious place, our joint account statements. 3 years back, then forward. Most of it was routine. Groceries, utilities, the mortgage, her gym membership. But there were transfers, small ones, irregular. Always to an account I didn't recognize. Not enough to raise an alarm on their own. Enough to notice if you were paying attention. Then I found a document. It was in the paper tray of her home printer, face down, slid under a grocery store coupon sheet like it had been forgotten in a hurry. A travel expense reimbursement form. Camilla's name at the top, dated 7 months prior. Hotel, 2 nights. A city she told me she hadn't visited since a trade conference 4 years ago. Room rate, incidentals, parking for 1 vehicle, and at the bottom, under additional travelers, a second name, Lester Crane. I stood at that printer for a long moment. The paper didn't shake in my hand. I wasn't the shaking type. I scanned it, saved it to a drive she didn't know existed, and put it back exactly where I'd found it. Then I went to the garage, sat on the workbench where I'd fixed 100 things over the years, and let myself feel it. Just for a minute. The weight of it. The confirmation of what I'd already known in my gut for months. I didn't cry. I didn't put my fist through the wall. I just sat with it until the feeling settled into something cold and clear and useful. I called Beau that night. "It's confirmed," I told him, "and it's been going on longer than I thought." He didn't say, "I told you so." That's why he was my friend. "Then it's time to talk to someone," he said. "Not a marriage counselor, a lawyer." I already had a name. A colleague at the plant had gone through a divorce 2 years back and mentioned a lawyer in Columbus, Sylvia Reston, 51, known for being thorough and not particularly sentimental about it. I called her office the next morning and had an appointment by the end of the week. But before that appointment, something else happened. I was cleaning out a storage box in the spare room. the kind of task you put off for years, when I found an old photo album. Camilla and I at the lake house the summer before we got married, both of us squinting into the sun, her laughing at something I'd said, my arm around her shoulders like I owned the whole afternoon. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I didn't feel rage looking at it. I felt the specific sadness of a man who realizes the version of his life he thought he was living ended a long time ago, and he just hadn't gotten the notification. I closed the album, put it back in a box, and drove to Sylvia Reston's office on a Thursday afternoon. She was exactly what I'd hoped for. Compact, precise. The kind of woman who got to the point without warming up to it. She looked at the documents I brought, the expense form, the account transfers, the hotel booking confirmation I'd pulled from a shared email thread Camilla had forgotten to delete, and she organized them on her desk without changing her expression. "You've done good preliminary work," Sylvia said, tapping the edge of the stack. "This is a foundation. We build on it." She explained what the next steps looked like. Ohio was an equitable distribution state. Camilla's income was significantly higher than mine, which worked in my favor depending on how assets were structured. The financial transfers would need forensic review. The expense forms were potentially actionable depending on what Crane's company policy looked like. "She's going to push for a share of your pension and your retirement accounts," Sylvia added, leveling her gaze at me. "Be ready for that." I nodded once. I'd expected it. Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief, exactly. More like the sensation of a bearing finally seated correctly. Everything clicking into alignment. The plan was real now. It had weight and direction. I drove home, made dinner, and set one plate on the table. Camilla came in at 7:40, saw the single plate, looked at me. "Weren't you going to make enough for both of us?" I picked up my fork and answered without looking up. "I didn't know if you'd remember to come home." The silence that followed was longer than any argument we'd ever had. I've known men who blow up when they're cornered, raise their voices, kick over furniture, make sure everyone in a 3-block radius knows they're suffering. I've never been built that way. When pressure builds in me, it doesn't explode. It compresses, gets denser, more precise. Camilla had never quite understood that about me, which turned out to be her single biggest miscalculation. 2 days after I met with Sylvia, I got a call from a number I recognized. One of Camilla's friends from her book club. A woman named Patricia, who'd always been perfectly pleasant in the manufactured way of people who never say what they actually think. She opened with small talk, then got to the point. "Nolan, I'm just calling because Camilla is really struggling right now, and I think if the two of you could just sit down together." "Patricia?" I cut in gently. "I appreciate you calling, I really do. But this isn't something that gets resolved over a sit-down." A pause. "She says you've been cold, distant, that you're not communicating." I let that land, then replied evenly. "Camilla had a full dinner waiting for her on our 15th anniversary. She texted me 4 words and didn't come home until 2 o'clock in the morning. I think the communication issues are fairly well documented." Another pause, longer, and she said she hoped I'd think about it, and we hung up. That was the first. By the end of the week, there had been 3 more. Her college roommate, a neighbor named Dave, who had always liked less than I let on, and her cousin from Dayton, who never once called me in 15 years of marriage. Camilla had assembled a delegation. She was working the phones like a campaign manager, trying to build consensus around a version of events where I was the unreasonable one. I took every call. I was polite to every one of them. And I said the same thing each time in different words. "I hear you." This isn't changing. What none of them knew, what Camilla herself didn't know yet, was that I'd already filed. But before the filing became real, something else needed to happen first. I got in word through Boyd, who had heard it from a contact at Camilla's company, that Crane had taken to calling the whole situation a misunderstanding, amplified by social media. He was managing his own reputation now, which meant he was nervous. Nervous men get careless, and careless men go to lunch. Boyd confirmed it on a Wednesday morning. Crane's got a regular table at Meridian Grill. Thursdays, noon. Usually takes a direct report. This Thursday, it's Camilla. I thought about it for exactly 40 seconds, and I told Boyd I'd handle it. Meridian Grill was the kind of restaurant that wanted you to know it was expensive without saying so directly. Dark wood, leather booths, waitstaff who introduced themselves. I arrived at 11:55 and asked for a table near the back. Not hiding, positioned. They came in at 12:10. Crane in a charcoal suit. Camilla in the navy blazer she wore when she wanted to look authoritative. They were mid-conversation when they spotted me. Crane saw me first. His stride broke, just slightly. But I caught it. I waited until they were seated 2 tables over. Let them order. Let the water get poured and the menus get handed back. Then I stood, walked over, and pulled out the empty chair at their table without being invited. Camilla's face went rigid. "Nolan, what are you—" "I won't be long," I said, settling into the chair and addressing Crane directly. "I want to give you the chance to look me in the eye and tell me that those San Diego travel receipts, the ones with both your names on them, represent a purely professional relationship." The table went very still. A couple 2 seats away glanced over. A waiter froze mid-approach. Crane's jaw tightened. "This isn't the place." "You call my house at 8 o'clock in the morning to warn me off?" I replied, keeping my voice conversational. "I'd say you made the choice about what's appropriate." I turned to Camilla. 15 years. I deserved better than 4 words and a cold dinner. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and looked at Crane one last time. "Your compliance department received an anonymous submission yesterday. I'd recommend you consult your legal team before the end of business today." Then I walked out into the afternoon light, got in my truck, and drove back to work. I had a hydraulic press to recalibrate. The machine needed attention. So did I. The compliance submission landed on Monday. By Wednesday, I could feel the aftershock from 20 miles away. Boyd called me at noon while I was running a torque analysis on a press that had been misfiring for 3 days. He'd heard through a contact at Camilla's company, someone in the administrative pool who talked more than she should, that the HR director had called an unscheduled meeting with department heads. Internal review. Sensitive matter. No further details. I set down my wrench and listened. "They're moving fast," Boyd said, "which means whoever received that submission took it seriously." "Good," I replied. "There's something else." He paused. "Crane made a call this morning to your plant manager, Owen Still, Fletcher. Said you've been acting erratically, that you were harassing company employees. Wanted to flag it as a professional concern." I absorbed that for a moment. Crane was reaching outside his lane, applying pressure where he thought I might be vulnerable. It was the move of a man who felt the floor shifting under him and was grabbing at anything solid. "What did Fletcher say?" Boyd almost smiled. I could hear it. Told him he didn't take personnel calls from people outside the organization and suggested he consult his own HR department. I exhaled slowly. Dave Fletcher had been my plant manager for 9 years. The man had more integrity in his coffee mug than Crane had in his entire LinkedIn profile. I made note to thank him. But the pressure didn't stop there. That same week, Camilla's friends came at me in second wave. Her college roommate sent a text. Her cousin from Dayton called. A woman who hadn't dialed my number once in 15 years of marriage. Then her neighbor Dave stopped me in the driveway on the Thursday evening, hands in his pockets, voice carefully casual, suggesting that sometimes people needed space to make mistakes and find their way back. I listened to every single one of them. "I hear you," I told each one, in different words each time. This isn't changing. What they didn't know, what Camilla herself didn't know, was that 2 days after my meeting with Sylvia, I had quietly submitted the filing for legal separation. The paperwork was already moving through the system. The decision had been made before any of them picked up their phones. Sylvia called me Friday afternoon with an update. The forensic accountant she referred me to had completed a preliminary review of the financial transfers. 11 separate transactions over 22 months. Total amount just under $14,000, all routed to a secondary account in Camilla's name alone. Opened 8 months after we got married. It's not a smoking gun on its own, Sylvia said. But combined with the expense documentation and the travel records, it builds a coherent picture of sustained concealment. What's our exposure on the pension? I asked. She'll go for it. Her attorneys will argue long-term contribution and shared sacrifice. We counter with the financial diversion. $14,000 redirected from marital assets weakens her claim of good faith partnership considerably. I wrote everything down in the same notebook I used to track equipment maintenance schedules, dates, figures, action items. Systems thinking applied to a collapsing marriage. It was the only way I knew how to operate. That evening, I went to Boyd's house for dinner. His wife Janet made chili and didn't ask questions, which was exactly what I needed. I sat at their kitchen table and felt, for the first time in weeks, like a human being instead of a case file. You holding up? Boyd asked once Janet had stepped out. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. Not because things were good, because I was clear. There's a difference between a man who's fine and a man who knows exactly where he stands. I was the second one. Walking to my truck that night, I stopped on the front porch for a moment and looked at the neighborhood. Porch lights on. A dog barking 2 houses down. Somebody's sprinkler clicking through its cycle. The ordinary world still going. I'd be part of it again. A different part, but still. I drove home, checked my email, and found one from Sylvia marked urgent. The forensic review had flagged something additional. A life insurance policy taken out in Camilla's name 18 months ago that listed a beneficiary I didn't recognize. Not a family member. Not me. I read it twice. Then I picked up my phone and called Sylvia back. Add it to the file, I said. The thing about the internet is that it doesn't forget. It archives, reposts, stitches, and duplicates. You can't stuff 1 million views back into a bottle. By the time Camilla figured out that the video wasn't going away, it had already passed 2 million. A men's podcast had dedicated a 20-minute segment to it. A therapist in Denver had turned it into a YouTube explainer with the title, What It Looks Like When a Man Is Done. That one alone had 400,000 views. And then Camilla did what people do when they can't control a narrative. She tried to hire someone to control it for her. Boyd found out through the same administrative contact. Camilla had engaged a crisis communications consultant, a freelancer who specialized in what the industry politely called reputation rehabilitation. The strategy, as Boyd described it, was straightforward. Position Camilla as the misunderstood victim of a passive-aggressive husband, reframe the video as a manipulation tactic, and generate sympathetic counter-content through anonymous channels. I read the summary Boyd sent me and almost laughed. The consultant apparently had no idea what Camilla had actually done. He was working from her version of events, which, by her telling, involved the stressed professional who forgot one dinner and whose husband responded by orchestrating a viral public humiliation. No mention of Crane. No mention of San Diego. No mention of $14,000 quietly moved out of joint account. I release any of that publicly. I didn't need to. The filing was already in. The evidence was already with Sylvia. The compliance submission was already under review. The story the consultant was trying to spin had a foundation of sand. Then Hazel called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice careful and quiet. Nolan, I need to tell you something. Camilla called me this afternoon. I sat down. What did she say? Hazel exhaled. She said if I didn't take the video down, even though it's already been shared 0 times, and taking it down would accomplish nothing. She was going to tell your mother things about our family that aren't true. Old things. Things about why our parents' marriage ended.
A pause.
She knows I've always been protective of that. Something hardened in me. Not rage. Something colder and more deliberate. Hazel, I said steadily, did you record that call? A brief silence. I did. I always record calls I think might go sideways. Send me the audio. She did, within minutes. I forwarded it to Sylvia with a single line. Attempted coercion of a witness. Please advise. Sylvia's response came back inside 20 minutes. This is now part of the file. Do not respond to Camilla about this. Let me handle it. I put the phone down and sat in the quiet of the house for a while. The house that still had her things in it. Her reading glasses on the nightstand. Her half-empty bottle of lotion by the sink. The particular presence of someone who didn't know yet that the walls had already shifted around them. The PR consultant's first move came 3 days later. A carefully anonymous Reddit post that painted a portrait of an emotionally withholding husband who weaponized a family gift to humiliate his wife publicly. It was well written. Plausible if you didn't know better. It got a few hundred upvotes before the comment section dismantled it, line by line. Then someone who'd seen the original video replied with a screenshot of Camilla's work calendar, publicly visible through a corporate event listing, showing a dinner reservation at a restaurant across town on the night of our anniversary. Stamped 7:45 p.m. 2 guests. The thread exploded. Camilla deleted her LinkedIn within the hour. The consultant, apparently, stopped returning her calls. I only posted one thing throughout all of it. A single comment under the original video. Quiet and final. Respect isn't demanded. It's demonstrated. She demonstrated hers. So did someone else. No name. No explanation. Just that. The comment rose to the top without any help from me, and somewhere in a conference room I'd never see. The first meeting about Lester Crane's conduct was already being scheduled. There's a kind of night that comes when everything is in motion, but nothing has landed yet. The papers are filed. The evidence is archived. The lawyer's working. And you're just a man sitting in a house that used to mean something, waiting for the next domino to fall. That week was full of those nights. Boyd came over on a Wednesday. We sat in the garage with the door open, 2 beers, the sound of the neighborhood settling into dark. He didn't push me to talk. That was the thing about Boyd. He understood that sometimes presence was the whole point. We watched the neighbor's cat walk the fence line, slow and unbothered, and neither of us said anything for a good 10 minutes. Then he asked, "You sleeping?" "Enough," I told him. "Eating." "Boyd, I'm asking." "Yes, I'm eating." He nodded and took a drink. Then, after a moment, "You know what I keep thinking about? The time you drove 3 hours in a snowstorm to pull my brother's car out of a ditch in Pennsylvania. You didn't even complain. You just went." I remembered it. His brother had called from a rest stop. Panicked. No AAA. 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd been out the door in 10 minutes. "Your point?" I asked. "My point is, that's who you are," Boyd said. "And that's not what she valued. That's a loss, not yours." I didn't answer, but I held on to that. The following night, I was driving back from a late shift. A compressor seal had failed, and I'd stayed 2 hours past my schedule to make sure the repair held under load. When I came across a situation on Route 40, a sedan was stopped on the shoulder, engine off, a woman in her 50s standing in the cold with her phone in her hand, looking at a tire that had gone flat in the worst possible place. No turnout, no streetlights, guardrail right behind her. I pulled over and got out. It took about 25 minutes. The spare was undersized, and the lug bolts had been cross-threaded by the last person who changed it, which took some patience and the right socket. She kept apologizing for the inconvenience, and I kept telling her there was no inconvenience. When we were done, She tried to hand me $40. I put my hands in my pockets. "Keep it," I said. "Drive safe." Pulling back onto the highway, something settled in me. Not peace, exactly. More like confirmation that I was still the man I'd always been. Whatever had happened to my marriage, whatever was coming, that part of me was intact. I got home at 11:15 to find Camilla's car in the driveway. She was in the kitchen, still in her work clothes, sitting at the table with a glass of wine she hadn't touched. She looked up when I came in. "Sylvia Reston sent paperwork to my attorney today," she said. Her voice was controlled, just barely. "That's how it works," I replied, setting my keys on the counter. "You've been planning this for weeks." Not a question. Her eyes were searching me for something. Anger, maybe, or guilt. Something she could work with. "I've been responding to a situation that's been building for longer than that," I answered, moving to the sink to wash the grease off my hands. "Nolan." Her voice shifted, softer now, the register she used when she wanted something. "We don't have to do this." I dried my hands, turned around, and looked at her directly. "Camilla, I found the expense form. I know about San Diego. I know it wasn't the first time. And I know Crane isn't the only name in this story." I held her gaze. "You had every opportunity to tell me the truth. You chose silence. I chose a lawyer." She looked down at the wine glass. Her jaw was tight. "The house," she started. "Sylvia's handling the house," I said, "along with the $14,000 and the insurance policy with the beneficiary I don't recognize." The color left her face. I picked up my keys. "I'm staying at Boyd's tonight. I'll have the rest of my things out by the weekend." I walked out. No slamming doors. No final speeches. Just a quiet click of a latch that had been holding for a long time and finally let go. Sylvia Reston had a saying she used with clients in their first meeting that I didn't fully appreciate until I was sitting across from her in week 4. "Divorce isn't a conversation. It's a construction project. Build it right or it falls on you." She'd build it right. The forensic accountant's full report landed on a Friday. 26 months of financial activity cross-referenced against travel records, expense submissions, and a secondary account Camilla had been using as a private buffer. The total diverted from marital assets came to just under $19,000 once the full scope was mapped. The initial estimate of 14 had been conservative. Sylvia walked me through it at her office, organized in tabs the way I organized maintenance logs. "Her attorneys are pushing 2 arguments," she told me, tapping the first tab. "First, that your pension and plant retirement account represent shared marital sacrifice, and she's entitled to equitable distribution. Second, that your retirement benefits and planned assets accumulated during the marriage qualify for partial claim." "She has nothing to do with my work," I said. "Her attorneys will argue she provided household stability that enabled your career growth." Sylvia's expression was dry. "It's a standard position. We counter with the financial diversion. 19,000 in redirected marital funds significantly undercuts the good faith partnership argument. We also submit documentation showing your plan's seniority and advancement predate the marriage by 4 years." She moved to the next tab. The insurance policy. "The beneficiary is a man named D. Vargas. We've identified him through property records. He corresponds to the initials you mentioned, DV. He appears in the Portland hotel booking as well." I sat with that for a moment. 2 men, 2 years of parallel deception. All while I came home, fixed machines, paid the mortgage, and convinced myself I was reading things wrong. "What's the recommendation?" I asked. "We file for divorce on grounds of adultery. Ohio allows it, and with the documentation we have, it's supportable. Adultery as grounds limits her claims on retirement assets and significantly weakens the marital contribution argument." Sylvia leaned forward slightly. "She's also going to face separate professional consequences. The coercion attempt against Hazel Drummond is on record. Her employer received a copy of the compliance report. Whatever happens there happens independent of our case, but it won't help her position. I nodded. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind for 2 weeks. The house, what's realistic? You built the down payment from your savings before the marriage. We have documentation. She contributed to the mortgage over 15 years, which the court will weigh. Most likely outcome is a buyout or forced sale with an equitable split, adjusted for the financial misconduct. She paused. It won't be a clean win on the house, but everything else, we're in strong shape. I thanked her, shook her hand, and walked out into a gray Tuesday afternoon, moving the last of my things from the house that weekend. I worked methodically. Tools from the garage, files from the den, the few pieces of furniture that had been mine before the marriage. I left everything else. The kitchen table where I'd eaten 1,000 dinners. The bookshelf she'd picked out. The brass candle holders her mother had left her. Still on the dining room sideboard. Unused since the night I'd walked out with the anniversary gift. Boyd helped me load the truck. We didn't talk much, just worked. On the last trip out, I paused in the doorway of the living room, looked at the room that had been the center of a life I thought I was living. Somewhere in a storage box in the truck was the photo album from the lake house, the summer before we got married. I decided to keep it. Not out of sentiment, because it was part of my history, and I wasn't in the business of erasing things that had actually happened. I closed the door behind me and got in the truck. The house sat quiet in the rearview mirror as we drove away. I've spent 19 years working with systems that have tolerance thresholds. Push a component past its limit, and it doesn't negotiate. It fails. The only question is whether the failure is controlled or catastrophic. What happened to Lester Crane was neither gradual nor dignified. It was a controlled demolition, and the people holding the charges have been patient a very long time. Boyd called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was running a calibration check on a new press assembly. He didn't open with small talk. The board meeting happened this morning, he said. 4 hours, close session. Carol got word out through the administrative chain. I set down my clipboard, and Crane walked in with a lawyer. Walked out without a job. I absorbed that. The expense documentation, all of it. Flight records, hotel invoices, the duplicate reimbursements. And apparently the texts his assistant printed off the company's server before he could wipe them. Boyd paused. Carol said the board chair read some of them out loud. The room went completely silent. I thought about Camilla sitting in that room, whether she'd been called in, whether she'd watched the man she'd redirected $14,000 toward get disassembled in front of a conference table full of people who'd been waiting for exactly this. What about his severance? I asked. That's the part, Boyd said, and I could hear the satisfaction he was keeping carefully controlled. His contract had a conduct clause, ethics violations, abuse of position, conduct bringing reputational harm to the firm. Any termination under those conditions forfeits severance, stock options, and deferred compensation. A beat. He walked out with nothing, not a dollar. I didn't gloat. I just nodded at the phone like Boyd could see it. How much was he forfeiting? Best estimate Carol heard floating around. Somewhere north of $6 million. $6 million. The price of arrogance and the assumption that no one was watching. He tried to retaliate, Boyd continued. Filed a defamation claim against the company the same afternoon. Their legal team responded in writing within 2 hours. 4 words. Try us. We dare you. He withdrew it the next morning. I thanked Boyd, ended the call, and went back to work. The press needed attention. The machine didn't care about Crane's severance package, and neither did my shift schedule. But that evening, sitting in Boyd's spare room where I'd been staying since I left the house, I let myself acknowledge what had happened, not with celebration, with a quiet recognition of a man who had done exactly what he set out to do, and watched it land exactly where it was meant to. Then Camilla called. I answered. I don't fully know why. Maybe because I thought she deserved one final conversation. I heard about Lester, she said. Her voice was hollow, scraped clean. I heard too, I replied. A long silence. Then, was any of it designed to do this? The video, the compliance submission. Was this all calculated from the beginning? I thought about that honestly. The video was Hazel's. I didn't plan it. The compliance submission. I filed that because I had documentation, and he called my house to threaten me. The rest of it happened, because things tend to fall apart when the foundation is rotten. I paused. None of it would have happened if you'd come home that night. She went quiet again. I heard her breathing. I keep thinking about the candles, she said finally. You left them burning. I did, I confirmed. I didn't even look at the dining room when I came in. I know. Another silence, longer than the others. Then she said, I'm sorry, no one. I know it's not enough. I know it's too late, but I'm sorry. I held the phone for a moment. I believe you, I said. It doesn't change anything, but I believe you. I ended the call and set the phone down on the nightstand. Outside, Boyd's neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked once, somewhere down the street. A car passed, the world going about its ordinary business. I opened my laptop and checked the original video one final time. Just over 4 million views. The comments had settled into the kind of steady stream that meant the clip had found its permanent place in the internet's long memory. I scrolled through for a minute. Strangers who would never know my name, parsing a moment of quiet decision that turned into something larger than I'd ever intended. I posted one final comment under the video. No announcement, no explanation. Some things you don't fix. You just learn to build better on cleaner ground. Then I closed the laptop and got some sleep. First solid night in weeks. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday in early November, 4 months after I'd walked out of Meridian Grill and told Lester Crane his afternoon was about to get complicated. Sylvia had built the case the way she'd promised, methodically, without sentiment, and with enough documentation to make Camilla's attorneys negotiate rather than litigate. In the end, Camilla dropped her claim on my pension in exchange for a clean split on the house sale proceeds. The $19,000 in diverted marital assets was acknowledged in the settlement agreement and offset against her share of the retirement accounts. She got nothing for my plant benefits. She got a portion of the house equity minus a documented adjustment for financial misconduct. It was equitable in the technical sense, and it was over. I shook Sylvia's hand outside the courthouse. She was already checking her phone for the next case. You did good work, she said, not looking up. Don't come back. I laughed, the first genuine one in a while. That's the plan. Camilla had been placed on administrative leave from her company 3 weeks after Crane's termination. The internal review had expanded to include her expense submissions, which had been authorized by Crane and flagged in the same audit. She resigned before the formal conclusion. Last I heard from Boyd, she was consulting independently and living in an apartment across town. We had no contact. That was the arrangement, and it worked for both of us. Crane's defamation filing had gone nowhere, as expected. His LinkedIn remained deactivated. His name appeared briefly in a regional business journal's roundup of executive departures, described only as departed following an internal review. One quiet paragraph. No crown, no eulogy. Hazel, for her part, had received something she hadn't expected. About 6 weeks after the video peaked, a letter arrived from a nonprofit, an education and community foundation, that had been watching how she handled the attention, not with performance, not with leverage, just with grace, under circumstances that would have broken a lot of people. They'd invited her to become an ambassador for a quiet integrity campaign they were building. She called me to ask if I thought she should do it. You'd be doing it because it fits who you are, I told her. That's the only reason you ever need. She took the role. I helped her prepare, made sure she had support without spotlight. She didn't want cameras or press, just a chance to be useful. That was Hazel. It always had been. I moved into a rental on the east side of Columbus in November. A two-bedroom craftsman with a detached garage that needed work. The garage alone was worth the rent. I spent the first weekend getting it organized. Tools on the pegboard, the workbench level and clean. The kind of satisfaction you can only get from putting a space in order with your own hands. Boyd came over that Sunday with his truck and a load of firewood that I hadn't asked for. For winter, he said, stacking it against the sidewall. I have a gas furnace. And now you have a fire pit option too, he replied, unmoved. We built a fire in the backyard that evening, the two of us and Janet, and sat out there until the cold made it impractical. I looked at the yard. Overgrown, patchy, a blank canvas, and thought about what I'd do with it come spring. New ground, literally and otherwise. I was still the same man who'd set that table, who'd lit those candles, who'd driven to Hazel's door at night with a gift that deserved better than a cold counter. That man hadn't gone anywhere. He'd just stopped putting his work into a place that wasn't built to hold it. 14 months later. I ran into Hazel at a coffee shop near her neighborhood. She was carrying a tote bag from the foundation. Looked lighter than she had in years. We talked for 20 minutes about her work, about the campaign's second phase, about nothing in particular. When she got up to leave, she paused. You doing okay? She asked. Better than okay, I told her honestly. She nodded once, smiled the way she always did, without theater, and walked out into the afternoon. I finished my coffee and sat there for a while, watching the street. People moving through their ordinary days, the sun on the glass. The particular quiet of a man who no longer had anything to prove to anyone. That was enough, and it was exactly what I'd earned.